tell me a little bit about how the conversation about creating something like this begins?
Well, my side of it was that Paul came and talked to me and had a very clear idea of what he wanted. I mean, it was very specific. He was going to be 66 next year. Oddly enough, I'd done a picture way back in the 60s that was just it was a sixpence. So it was like a butcher's sign, but it just had a 6 and a little D for old pence. So I knew exactly the 6 I wanted to use. I probably still had reference for it or something. Yeah. So it was very specific what Paul wanted. And then I added the blue and red border, which is a kind of a motif I use, and signed it, which can go on or come off for the actual record.
The fascinating thing about this is it's fairly minimal, but I immediately recognise it as a Peter Blake piece of work. And
That's because he's got his name down there.
That's one reason. Yeah.
Is there another reason?
Well, I think, as I said, the red and blue border is a motif.
Yeah.
I've got a kind of library in my mind of imagery, a star, a heart. I used to use a rainbow a lot, but I haven't so much recently. And target.
Yeah.
The mod target.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's a link between us two. I didn't invent it. It's obviously the RAF motif that was on aeroplanes, and the mods picked up on it, and I picked up on it around the same time. Yeah. So you would have, if you knew my work, the red and blue border would have indicated that it was by me.
Can you remember when you first became aware of Peter's work, Paul?
Oh, probably like from 70s.
Yeah.
I've been probably too young to even think about art or anything like that when I was a kid in the 60s, but from the 70s definitely. Just with my whole interest in the 60s and that whole era. And I was talking to someone the other day who was talking about who are my favourite artists and painters, and I have to say probably Pete obviously amongst them, but probably all the pop artists, because I suppose that was the first sort of time I ever took any notice of art from all the different pop artists, because it had a contemporary feel. It wasn't like cherubs and chariots and all that gear. So it was sort of very the fact that we're using everyday images but turning them around a little bit, that appealed to me as well, the whole kind of notion of doing that.
What draws you to sort of collaborating with musicians?
Because I'm a fan, I love rock and roll.
Yeah.
And I love the Beach Boys. I mean, Brian Wilson is my great hero, for a lot of reasons, but I'm a fan, so.
Right, okay.
So there's an immediate, that link was always there.
Of course, the first time you directly worked together, you obviously did the artwork for Stanley Road. How did that come about, Paul? Can you remember?
It came about through Simon Halfon, who was doing the sleeve designs at that time. And he suggested we should ask Peter, and I just thought that's just totally out of our orbit, I just thought we'd never be able to afford him, or we wouldn't be interested anyway. But he did agree to do it, yeah. And I mean, that's just become such an iconic sleeve, isn't it?
Yeah.
But it just made sense, because there was a lot of my childhood sort of bound up in that album, in certain tunes, some references to growing up and whatever. So it kind of it all seemed to make sense. We gave Peter some bits and pieces, and then I think Peter probably added other stuff and just built up that collage like that.
Do you make a point of getting to know the music, or is it almost better to keep the purity of the conversation separate from listening to the music? Or is there...
Again, it depends. I mean, with 66, Paul gave me a copy, a CD, and I played it quite a bit and listened to it and liked it. But I didn't hear it before I did the cover.
Right. Okay.
So
So
it was so specific that I didn't need to know
yeah.
what the music was like.
But sometimes that can happen, right? I mean, you can, because part of the reason I ask is because with records that we love, you know, the sleeve becomes synonymous with, you know, it becomes inseparable from the experience of listening to records. That's happened with so many records that you've worked on. I mean, as a collector yourself, Paul.
Yeah.
You know, you'll know that already, won't you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I was just thinking then, like all those Reed Miles sleeves for Blue Note and all that, you know, all that stuff was just so amazing. I mean, the music was great, obviously, but just to me, that music is always bound up in that visuals as well.
Yeah.
The graphics and the way they used to use the lettering and great shots, you know, cutting shots in half and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I still think I'm of that generation where it's still important. And even when I'm making a record and putting the artwork together and getting all the different sources, strands, I'm only thinking about the vinyl.
Yeah.
I don't really care about the CD, you know. And the digital thing, I mean, obviously it's that big now. So I only think about the 12 by 12 vinyl sleeve, you know, that's all that's important to me. If that's looking great, then that's good enough for me, you know.
I mean, it could be Sgt. Pepper, but it could be you know, so those formative experiences where you stare and stare and stare at a record, and whilst you listen to the record,
Yeah.
and the experience becomes greater than the sum of both the music and the image together,
Yeah.
and that happens
Absolutely,
so much.
yeah.
That's central to the way.
Well, I've got to say, that's Sgt. Pepper and me, do you know what I mean? When I was a kid, I bought it. I didn't buy it in '67 because it took me a year to save up for it, so I bought it in early '68 or something like that. But the same thing, I just played the record over and over, flip it over, turn it over, keep it over, and I would just look at the sleeve and read all the words and look at the images and all the characters in the collage, and that will always be, you know, it's a very strong image in my mind. You know, just sitting in my bedroom and listening to that record and looking at the sleeve. I mean, it's an important thing, man. It's an important cultural moment for kids or a young person when you get into music, I think.
Yeah, I mean, you asked earlier about the links with the designer and the musician, and in that case, it's interesting because none of it illustrates the record, but we were going in to Abbey Road while the Beatles were recording.
Right.
So the day, for instance, they recorded "Lovely Rita Meter Maid," that we went back to Paul's house with a copy of it, and he played it for the first time to us. Yes, to us. And Jane Asher cooked bacon and eggs, I remember. So although, as I say, there was no, we weren't illustrating the songs, I was involved. I'd heard all as they made them.
I've got to ask you, another thing that really underscores the connection you have with music was this incredible tribute concert that happened at the Royal Festival Hall that, Paul, you were involved in. For your 90th birthday.
Well, Paul organised it, yeah.
Tell me a little bit about how that came together.
I just thought we should acknowledge Pete's 90th, his 90th birthday. I mean, it's a grand age to get to, and obviously his work speaks for itself, you know. But I just thought it would be nice for a lot of the people involved that night were people who had either knew Pete, who know Peter, or have had, you know, worked with him and he's worked on their sleeves, whatever. But just our tribute to the man and his work, you know, and his art and his influence on us all.
It must be at least 21 years since you received a knighthood, is that right?
I guess it is by now, yeah, it's a long time. Well, my mum, yeah, it would be, because my mum was 90, and when you get the letter, it's a very strange process. You get a letter saying, if we offered you a knighthood, would you accept it? And you write back yes or no, and then you don't hear anymore. And they say, don't talk about this, don't talk about it to anybody. And my mum was 92. And I thought, she could have died any moment. But I also knew that if I told her, within 5 minutes, the whole of Great Britain would know. I mean, she would have been straight on the phone. You know, I knew she would, and bless her for doing that. So I didn't tell her, you know, and till eventually, on the night before it's announced, they say you can tell them that. So I was able to tell her before it was actually announced.
Have you received that phone call, Paul?
I've had it a couple of times, yeah.
And no, not for you.